Welcome back, guys, to another ND Miata comparison. Today we are comparing a bone stock ND3 Club with the Brembo BBS Recaro package against a heavily modified ND2 Miata that's been prepped specifically for the track with nothing held back. It's still streetable, but just barely. So this ND3 is owned by my friend Kevin from the Jabal and Cars YouTube channel. I've driven this car before, but never on this road. So I'm curious to see how a completely stock ND3 with the most desirable driver's package, which is the BBR package, which gives us those front Brembo brakes, the BBS wheels, and these amazing manually adjustable Recaro seats. And the fact that this is a soft top means that this car weighs only a bit over 2,300 pounds. We have the 2-liter naturally aspirated inline 4-cylinder engine, revs to 7,500 RPM, 181 horsepower, 151 pound-feet of torque, double wishbones at the front, multi-link at the rear. It's just a recipe for driving pleasure, but it's a softly sprung car. So once we jump from this into that modified ND2, which also has an engine tune, bringing it up to about 200 brake horsepower, or 10% more than this, let's see if a fully track-prepped ND2 or 3 can still be enjoyable in the canyons and on the street. So we got the nice, soft suspension, which is funny because this actually has the upgraded Bilstein dampers. Love this 6-speed manual. One of the best manuals in a brand new car right now, if not the best. So soft. But it's so easy to drive, so easy to control. And I love the updated ND3 steering rack. It's got really good load up in the corners, and the on-center feel is really tight. Bit of unexpected oversteer there, and that's one thing you gotta love about a stock Miata, is that the limits are low. It's actually not a cornering machine in terms of outright lateral G's, and so you really get to play with the limits of the car with minimal risk. The throttle does require a bit of a heavier blip than you might expect for a high-revving NA engine, but it's still very predictable. It's very consistent. Once you get used to it, you nail 2 or 3 downshifts, and then it just becomes second nature. Oh yeah. See, over these bumps, mid-corner, the car gets upset because the suspension's just so roly-poly. There's so much motion. This does need an intake though. The induction noise is just lacking. For a high revving NA 4-cylinder, it's too muted. Let's see if that modified example has a more enjoyable engine sound and character. Ooh. This car definitely wants to dance with you. And this updated LSD for the ND3 generation, a lot of controllability on throttle. Even though technically they tuned it for slightly more corner entry stability, on corner exit, all you gotta do is give it a heavy right foot and the car will step out. It's so easy to get into a groove with this thing. Very, very natural and easy car to drive quickly. Outside of that mid-corner bump behavior where the chassis just gets very easily upset, That's really my only significant complaint, I would say, with a stock ND2 or ND3. Even with the Bilstein dampers, it's just too soft. But the controls, the shifter, the steering, especially for the ND3, the brake feel with these Brembos, excellent. The throttle response, very consistent and predictable. Even the clutch, nice and short throw, easy to modulate. For a bone stock car that you can buy brand new, this car is just an absolute pleasure to drive. Can't wait for Kevin to start modifying this for the track. I will say this ND3 steering rack is very good. I love the way it loads up. I've said that so many times now in various videos, but it's worth repeating. It is a pretty good step up over the ND2 in terms of steering feel. And it's not necessarily the feedback about what's going on the road surface, but rather just the load up behavior based on the lateral G's that the tires are experiencing. This engine just needs to make more induction sound though. I don't necessarily need a loud exhaust, but I want to be able to hear the engine rev out from inside the car. And supposedly that modified ND2 has been upgraded with some intake mods to do just that. So I'm very excited to drive that car now. Alright, we're now in this fully track prepped ND2 Miata mod list, as always in the video description. But some of the things I want to point out are the Shaftworks Bilanx one-way coilovers. They're 12 kilogram springs up front, 6K in the rear. That is very stiff for an ND Miata. I think the Sakibom Olin's Grand Touring spec that I reviewed on an ND3 not too long ago had 6K, 3K. So this is double the spring rate. We've got some Karcepts sway bars front and rear, 17 by 9 inch Flyin Miata Kogeki wheels with Kumho V730s, 245 all around. We have the OEM front Brembos with some upgraded Project Mu pads, a Fab 9 Stage 2 tune with headers, and the Induction sound mod, which the owner William mentioned basically redirects the stock active sound tube to bring more induction notes into the cabin. Also, we have full aero on this thing, a crazy 9 lives 67-inch chassis mount wing, and a massive custom front splitter. Same engine as the ND3, but as William mentioned, with the tune and the bolt-ons, this should be making around 200 at the crank. Also a soft top car, so should weigh around 2,300 pounds as well, although he has removed the passenger seat and gutted the rear interior, so I'm guessing this might actually be a little under 2,300 pounds. Love this aftermarket Momo steering wheel. Now this seat does not move forward or back, so I am sitting a couple of inches too far back, so excuse the gangsta lean. CAE shifter as well, which is quite nice because it reduces the distance from the steering wheel to the shifter. Now, because of this CAE shifter, there's a lot of transmission whine, maybe because all the sound deadening's been removed. Wow. That is about 20 decibels louder than stock, I'd reckon. Definitely way more induction sound from the engine now at high revs. Wow, the CAE shifter is so mechanical, but it's stiff. You have to work for those downshifts. Yeah, the suspension really, really stiff for canyon driving. I can see why it would work on the track, but I think for canyon driving, I'd want a bit lower of a spring rate. Maybe like an 8K, 4K or something like that. Wow, this car's raw. Lots of squeaks and this interior being gutted. Still really good throttle response, and I'm glad I can just hear the engine so much more clearly now. It's still not an S2000 engine in terms of theater, but definitely a big improvement over the stock ND3 and ND2. It almost sounds like it has straight cut gears. First gear. Wow, this transmission, it rattles so hard at high RPM. You gotta be careful with this stiff of a suspension on a bumpy canyon road. It's pretty unforgiving. Going over these bumps, I mean, the dampers still soak them up for the most part, but the tolerance level is so much lower. You have to have much quicker inputs in order to correct anything. Very, very sensitive front end. The car just wants to turn. I wouldn't be surprised if this spring rate is like 3 or 4 times that of stock. Oh my goodness. This thing would be a riot on track. It's so touchy to inputs, and that's what you want. It's not overly sensitive, it's just very, very direct and responsive. I still think that ND3 steering feels a little bit better in some ways in terms of the load up and the on-center firmness and tightness, but no question, in terms of the actual response of that front end, steering feel aside, this is way, way more responsive. If I just turn left to right within the lane, the front just responds so quickly, whereas the ND3, it takes a few milliseconds to settle before it wants to go back in the other direction. Most hardcore Miata I've driven, definitely, even compared to that red ND2 that I drove at Thunderhill West a few months back. This is way less streetable, way more hardcore, but the benefits are that instant response. Now obviously the aero does next to nothing at canyon speeds, but I'm sure on track this thing would be a grit monster. These Kumho V730 tires, more than grippy enough for this kind of driving. Oh wow, those bumps this car did not like. There's so little ride height. Oh wow, gotta be careful even going over bits of gravel and loose rocks on the road. I wouldn't be surprised if this car could pull off maybe a 1 minute 40-second lap time at Laguna. Maybe not quite. I mean, the power level is still quite low for a track like Laguna, but maybe at a track like Thunderhill West, this thing would be super quick because it just has so much grip and it's so stiff and responds so quickly to inputs. Oh, look at that. That low RPM induction note, that's quite nice. I wish it wasn't drowned out by this super loud transmission though. I can actually feel the heat emanating up from the transmission through this gear lever. Not the greatest street car. I would love to try this car at a track day. We'll see if we get an opportunity in the future. But in the canyons, yeah, it's definitely compromised, but for a good reason. This thing has been designed to go around a smooth corner as quickly as possible. So big shout out to Will for letting me review this track prepped ND2, and a big shout out to Kevin as well. In terms of the differences between these two cars, it's really night and day. The responses of a stock ND3 or ND2 are definitely a bit on the lazier side, and there's definitely a happy medium between that and something as hardcore as this. I really think a suspension setup with a spring rate somewhere in between stock and this, maybe a 6 to 8K front spring rate, 3 to maybe 4K in the back, might just be perfect. The mods that Will has done to open up the sound of this engine, definitely welcome. CAE shifter, I actually could take it or leave it. I think for track it makes sense because of that shorter distance from the steering wheel to the shifter, but in terms of actual shift pleasure, I actually think the stock shifter is just as enjoyable because it's lower effort than the CAE, but still very tight and mechanical. Alright guys, let me know what you think about this build and how it compares to a stock ND2 or ND3. What is the sweet spot for these cars? If you want something that can be streetable, fun in the canyons, and set some great times at the track, what is the perfect set of mods? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.